Hey, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about how to lengthen your health span with behavioral modification. So, we know that aging will affect every body system we have. And it's up to us to use behaviors such as nutrition, weightlifting, cardiovascular activity, sleep, to improve the outcome of our biological health. So, our chronological health is how old we are in time, and our biological health is how old our tissues are relative to the average. So, first in our toolkit is cardiovascular exercise, and this is an incredibly potent tool that we all should be leveraging in our everyday lives, and that's because when we age, our hair gets grayer, but we also develop gray hairs in other places. So we get the equivalent of gray hairs in our heart tissue, in our brain tissue. And the potent tool for reducing and preventing these diseases is cardiovascular exercise. So the American College of Sports Medicine recommends 150 minutes of continuous or dispersed, so it doesn't have to be all at the same time, of cardiovascular exercise. So personally, I like to run and walk 150 minutes. I do a little bit over that. So 3 days a week, I do 60 minutes of cardiovascular exercise. So it's about 180 minutes. But you can walk 180 minutes and still get the benefit as long as you're getting your heart rate elevated, which is amazing because cardiovascular exercise has tremendous benefits with preventing things like not osteoporosis possibly, but hypertension, Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's disease. These disease states that are not well treated with pharmaceutical interventions can be treated with behavioral modifications, diet, and activity. Obviously, if you have one of these conditions, do not treat only with cardiovascular exercise. This video is how can we modify our chronological age with lifestyle interventions to improve our biological age. So cardiovascular exercise is undoubtedly a powerful intervention. There was a study that shows an increase of VO2 max, which is the maximum amount of oxygen you can consume, can improve your all-cause mortality. If you go from a low to a elite VO2 max, you can increase your all-cause mortality resistance by 5 times. And that's from an article from Peter Attia, who examines cardiovascular literature. So you can click that in the article on my website, CRG Physical Therapy. And if you are interested in implementing a cardiovascular practice, I have a free program on my website that will be linked in the article at crgphysicaltherapy.com. The next tool we have is strength training, and strength training is incredibly effective at reducing your bone loss and muscle loss through aging because of Wolff's Law. And Wolff's Law is the idea that when you load your tissue, when you stimulate your tissue by resistance training, so you're loading your bones, you're loading your muscle, you're stimulating an adaptation in those cells. And that's important because if you're inactive through your life, you will lose your tissues. And if you lose your tissues, you won't have any strength left when you're 60, 70. You'll be dependent, wheelchair bound. And that's what I'm talking about when I want you to increase your health span, because just because you're 20 and healthy doesn't mean you can sit on your butt for 60 years and you're going to maintain the same amount of muscle mass and strength you have now. That's just not true. And so that's why I'm saying we should be implementing these lifestyle interventions that are free, like strength training. I do it 3 days a week. I go to the gym. I do resistance training formally with weights. Although there is a free program on my YouTube channel and on my website, CRG Physical Therapy, that has a free way to load your bones and muscles with your body weight. So it couldn't get easier than that. So if you'd like to do barbell training, Like I like to do deadlifts, squats, bicep curls, all the fun stuff for bodybuilding, but it really doesn't have to be that much of a hobby. It can be something you do 30 minutes a day for 2 times a week, and that's been shown to be effective to get the benefits of Wolff's Law to ward off osteoporosis, or the loss of bone mineral density, and sarcopenia, or the loss of muscle tissue and muscle related strength. Next tip we have for you is stretching and flexibility training. This is really interesting because some people think stretching and flexibility is an inferior modality to health. I would argue from a student physical therapist perspective that it's just as important as cardiovascular or resistance training for your function and mobility as you age. And what's cool about this system is an 80-year-old who is actively stretching, does a yoga practice, or they just move more than a 30-year-old, can actually have more flexibility, more function than someone who's younger. And that's what I'm talking about with this health span stuff, is that it matters what you do with your time outside of your chronological age. Because if you're 30 and you have a desk job, you don't move very much, you will develop these things called contractures, where imagine if you're trying to reach overhead for a box of cereal and you get stuck at 90 degrees, your shoulder gets stuck at 90 degrees, you can't go above that. That's a reduction in your function, and your life will suffer as a result of that. So I think mobility and stretching is super important. People devalue stretching because it's not as, I guess, sexy as the other systems or whatever. But I'd like to say you should be stretching like 5 minutes a day, at least, at the very minimum. Like before I work out, I do a 5-minute dynamic warm up. So I actively go through the range of motion in all of my joints before I use them. And then after the workout, I do a 5-minute static stretching routine that gets me to lengthen my muscles at their end range, and that will improve the length of my muscle tissue, and using that muscle tissue through its full range will allow you to keep that full range well into your old age. And 1 day a week, I do a dedicated yoga practice, which is essentially for my own flexibility interests, but this is dose dependent stuff. So the more stretching you do, the more function, the more flexibility, the more range of motion you're going to gain. And this is important because if you do not do this stuff, it's really hard to get it back when you are older. So it's way easier to implement it in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s before you get contractures and complications. So hopefully that was useful, and you can check out, I have a stretching routine on the hamstrings on my YouTube channel, and if you look through it, you can apply it to any muscle of the body, but that's specifically for your hamstrings. And next, we need to find healthy coping mechanisms to replace negative coping mechanisms that are actively hurting our biological health. So we know that alcohol is bad, opiates, other sorts of drugs can be destructive for your biological health. And our goal is to replace those negative habits with more constructive behaviors. So we know that exercise can release feel-good chemicals such as like endorphins or enkephalins, which our body naturally produces, and we can use those sorts of lifestyle behaviors to throw out opiate usage. And so if you do have chronic pain, I'd recommend going to see a physical therapist or a doctor to get that looked at. Though if you do just implement these behavioral interventions early, you'll be buffered against disease and pain. And the next thing we can do is like a social support system. So instead of using alcohol to numb the pain, you can talk to your friends, or you can go get, it's CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy. You can receive that from a social worker or a psychologist. and that's been proven to reduce symptoms of depression, sadness. So personally, I like to write, I like to journal. So every day I journal about my goals, what I found meaningful, and I have a gratitude practice that I walk through, and it helps my mental state, because your mental state, I believe, also impacts your biological state. And the next tool we have is nutrition. And nutrition is incredibly important because our body is made out of building blocks. And if we're not consuming them, we're not giving our body resources to repair our tissues to maintain that biological health for 80 years. Because, if you're breaking down your tissues through walking, working out, existing, you have to replenish that. And if you're not intaking it through your diet, then you'll just be in a dysfunctional state. And so on my website, I have a detailed breakdown of calcium, vitamin D, protein, vitamins and minerals, and hydration, because as we age, we dehydrate, and it's important that we replenish that liquid so that we don't dry out as quickly, essentially, because we're mostly water, we're mostly protein, and we should be intaking that normally with like fiber and other things like that. And lastly, guys, we need to protect our sleep. So we should be getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep every single night, and we should be protecting our bed from being associated with social media or bright lights or other things like that. So we should be protecting our sleep, because when we live, our tissues get damaged. We need to recover that damage. So when you sleep, your body is in an ideal state to heal, because your cortisol or stress levels decline, and your growth hormone is a marker of building tissue. And so you're destroying tissue less because cortisol is decreasing and growth hormones increasing. So you're in an ideal state to build or rebuild your damaged tissue. And if you're not sleeping well, you're not doing yourself a favor with your biological age. So I know that was a lot. And on my website, I have all of these resources listed out, typed out, for your reference for free. So yeah, go check out those resources and let me know if you learned something, and hope to see you guys in the next one. Peace.